on these boards in these pools come March. That's why these teams have made their way down here to Austin to get familiar and tune up with the layout. So it's brought us great competition for the 3 days of diving we will see, starting with today's men's 1 meter. 32 started this morning. It's ordered down to 8. It goes from worst to first from this morning's competition, but none of that carries over.
No, none of it carries over. Everyone is going to start from 0. Now, when you look at that list, I see four athletes who were in finals last year at NCAA championships. Briadam Herrera was not competing. Otherwise, I am certain he would have also been in that event. So you're really seeing a top national champion caliber event right here in November, which we don't always get to see.
We'll start things off with Joseph Cifelli, the senior from Purdue. Comes from Crown Point, Indiana. We'll start things off with a back 2.5 somersault tuck.
That's a pretty solid dive to start off the list. I like the idea of starting off with a backwards dive from the standpoint of maybe you're a little nervous in the beginning. You don't want to do that hurdle and kind of get a little uncomfortable. He comes out of that tuck position. You see him just shy of vertical when he hits the water. Doesn't make the dive all the way around, and the judges will deduct for that.
54 even for Cifelli, which will bring up David Hoffer from Arizona State. Graduate student from Littleton, Colorado. Have seen him a couple times over the years here at the UT Diving Invitational. Forward 2.5 somersault pike to open things off here in the final round.
Oh, now that's disappointing. It looked beautiful in the air. He has a great pike position, a lot of height off the diving board, but unfortunately comes out of that pike a little too late, and when he reaches for the water, he doesn't land perfectly vertical, and instead his legs just wash past and also create quite a big splash in the process.
7 judges registering scores. Take us through how the scoring works after that.
After that, once all of these judges immediately input their scores, you're going to drop the 2 highest and the 2 lowest scores. You'll then take those 3 middle scores, add them up, and multiply them by the degree of difficulty. Now, the DD that you see there in the bottom left, a 3.1 on this particular dive, that is a degree of difficulty, a multiplier that is assigned to every single dive. So the higher that multiplier, the higher potential score you could get.
Yusuf Selim, the diver from Arizona State. And Kat, that was the point that you had brought up, degree of difficulty on this 1 meter, the difference that will separate a lot of these competitors. What do you think of the dive from Selim?
Diving board, if anything, a couple inches too far away from it. Comes out of that tuck position a hair early. Maybe thought he was moving a little faster than he really was, or was just a little bit conservative and leaves it short and a little splashy.
A junior who hails from Cairo, Egypt, in with his first dive. Next will be Sam Thornton from Texas A&M, a senior. From Belden, United Kingdom, an honorable mention All-American after a 6th place finish at last year's NCAAs. So one of those competitors we have talked about, brings in that caliber of experience. Forward 3.5 somersault tuck will be the first dive for Thornton.
Now, we haven't seen this dive yet. David Hoffer we saw do a front 2.5. So you figure he's now adding an entire rotation, although this time doing it in the tuck position. Degree of difficulty is a 3.0 though. Excellent dive. That right there, the important part about this dive is getting a great hurdle. Being balanced and confident right there at the end of the diving board like he was. Perfect distance from the diving board. Comes out of that tuck at the right time and is able to grab his hand before he hits the water, which we'll see here perfectly at this angle, which is how you enter the water without much splash at all.
5.7s, 2 7.5s for Thornton, who will jump to the top of the leaderboard above Selim with a 64.50 on his initial dive halfway through the first of 6 dives we'll see from our 8 competitors. This Juan Hernandez from LSU. Hails from San Nicolas de los Garcia, Mexico.
Oh, now this is a good example of a slightly easier dive, a front 2.5 pike. The degree of difficulty is only a 2.6, but he executes it beautifully. Great position in the air, is able to come out of that pike so early and just float it around. It looks so graceful. You're going to see 8.5s and 8s from the judges. Excellent first round.
Won a 3-time All-American once on the 1 meter board, the 2018 SEC champ. Registers a score, of 63.70. That will put him into second. In the first Longhorn, we have seen Jordan Windle, the sophomore from Morrisville, North Carolina. Great story we'll get into throughout competition this weekend. Same dive as Hernandez.
Same dive and executed just as well, if not a little better. His entry is just slightly cleaner. He has such an amazing rip, which is that entry where you hear a pop on the water and he pulls all that water under with him, so there's barely any splash. Oh, you're going to see, we've got 8s. I see 1 9, 2 9s from the judges. Great way to start his round.
Windle, a 3-time All-American, the reigning Big 12 Diver of the Year, finished 5th in this event at last year's NCAA Championships, and he is atop the leaderboard after 1 dive, and even 65. It's now Colin Zhang, a redshirt senior. Fujian, China is where he was born, the 3-time All-American, the 2018 SEC Diver of the Year, 205C. Saw this from Cefeli earlier.
Oh, and that's well executed, but very splashy when he hits the water. I don't know if he got enough height off of the diving board in order to complete the dive in time and really get a good grip on his hand in order to get a solid entry. Looks great in the air, good distance, but just a little too much splash when he hits.
Zhang, the NCAA champion on platform last year, so looking forward to that matchup Friday against Jordan Windle. He finished 4th on the 1 meter at NCAA's last year. That a 61.50. As the final dive of the first round, the senior from the University of Miami, hails from Havana, Cuba, Briadam Herrera.
Now he's going to be doing the exact same dive we just saw from Colin Zhang, so this will be a great reference for comparison. Oh, and see, that's how it's supposed to look. That's a very difficult dive, and Briadam Herrera just made that look so easy. Comes off of the diving board, great height, but he just rotates so quickly, completes 2.5 flips faster than anyone else we saw in this round, which is why he's able to get such a clean entry. 8s from most of the judges, a few 7.5s thrown in there, but for a total of 70.5 points, putting him atop the leaderboard by 5.5 points already.
Herrera did not compete in the 2017-18 season due to an injury. He received a medical red shirt, but already off to a great start. He won the 1 meter title at the USA Diving National Championships. First place finish at the Miami and University of Florida dual meet, and currently in first place through 1 round of diving.
As he should be. Not only was his dive a little bit more difficult than what we saw from Jordan Windle, but it was executed beautifully. Already off to a 5.5 point lead, and frankly, he's gonna probably build on that if people can't keep up with that caliber of diving.
5th place finish on the 1 meter at NCAA's last year for Briadam Herrera. As you see, Matt Scoggin, the well-accomplished head coach.
Yeah, he's got a pretty decent resume.
From the University of Texas, gets to play host to all these teams, and spruced up the place is Cefeli on with his second dive, 305C.
He's going to be a little disappointed. That was exactly the hurdle and the top of the dive that he was looking for, what he saw in the air. Excellent rotation, perfect distance from the diving board, just comes out and reaches for the water, arches his back a little bit more than he needs to. But still pretty good scores. 7s from most of the judges, a few 7.5s even thrown in there.
4 7s. Brings him to an even 63. Kat just mentioned they spruced up everything here at Lee and Joe Jamail. Really looking forward to hosting the NCAAs, but there's another big event going on this weekend, but a lot of these competitors, teams staying away from that to come here to utilize this opportunity for what lies in the spring.
There are a ton of invitationals throughout the U.S. this weekend or within the next few weeks, but this is the meet that everyone wanted to come to, again, in order to get that opportunity to get a feel for the pool and the diving boards before NCAAs. Because of that, though, I was listening to some of these coaches on the pool deck earlier. There's currently an international Grand Prix where you have to qualify to represent your country happening in Australia, and they actually feel the depth at this competition is higher than what they're seeing at that international Grand Prix event.
So just to give you a heads up as to what you're watching for and the caliber of competitor, as David Hoffer in with his second dive, scores a 54 even. As we've been doing this now 4 years, and Coach Matt Scoggin saying that this is the best highly contested Texas Invitational he has ever seen.
I don't remember ever seeing it like this. And we had some great teams. I mean, granted, it was about a decade ago when I was doing it, not to age myself, but we had some excellent diving. I don't remember it ever looking like this as far as just the depth and quality of divers.
Teammate of Hoffer, Yusuf Salim, in with the same dive we just saw from Hoffer.
And now he got a better hurdle than what his teammate David Hoffer did. Unfortunately, he just looks a little sloppier in the air. Completes the dive pretty well. A lot of splash, though, when he hits the water. His form in midair doesn't look quite as polished as what we've seen. So you're going to see some deductions, 6s, 6.5s from the judges.
Scores a 57 even, coming off a third-place finish against UCLA. Second against USC in fall action thus far. Sam Thornton had a good dive to open up his competition. Reverse 1 1/2 somersault, 2.5 twist free. It's enough to just say.
You got that right. Look at that.
Well, let's see how he does
Just
the dive.
shaking
Much
off
harder
the
to do
diving
than
play-by-play dust. I'm impressed.
than say it.
You know what? He did it just as well as you said it. That would you look at that? That's why I love watching Sam Thornton dive. He's just consistent. He's a very solid diver and also looks just very polished and put together in the air. His toes are always pointed. His knees are always straight, which is something you want to look for in this twist. And the judges are rewarding it. 8s, 7.5s, a few 7s, but 67.5 on that dive is a very solid second round.
I was going to give myself an 8.
Were you? I was more of a 7.5, but
all
that's
right.
fine.
You have a much finer
You can be a
eye
little
than I.
generous on your judging. That's fine.
Thornton off to a great fall, has 3 first-place finishes, so trying to build his way up the leaderboard. It's now Juan Hernandez. A 107B coming up. This is an important dive for Hernandez.
Wow. This is the most difficult dive we've seen so far tonight, and also probably one of the best. Look at this pike position. His chest is flat on his legs. His knees are perfectly straight. Makes that look easy. And let me tell you guys, that is not easy. That is a lot of dive to accomplish in 1 meter. A 9 from one judge, and frankly, I like it because he deserves that. That's an excellent dive.
77.55 for Hernandez will put him atop the leaderboard. The 7th place finisher at last year's NCAAs. Won the event at the SEC Championship. Now Jordan Windle. Back 2.5 somersault tuck. DD of 3.0.
Oh, see, that was a beautiful dive. Unfortunately, he came out of that tuck a hair too late. Lets it wash over just past vertical. You'll see here when he hits the water. Still a well-executed dive. 7s from the majority of the judges, but that had potential to be 8, 8.5 if he had kicked out at just the right time a smidgen earlier.
Native Cambodian. Has the Cambodian flag tattooed on his tricep, you see there. Lived in an orphanage until he was 2. His parents died when he was a baby. Dad, Jerry, adopted him, something that you'll get to see here shortly. Hear the story of young Jordan Windle. Colin Zhang.
Oh, that's disappointing because that was an excellent dive from the hurdle all the way through until he comes out of that tuck position and reaches for the water. Looks beautiful. Comes out probably a hair too late, but also pulls his body and reaches for the water a little too aggressively. Maybe thought he was a little lower or moving a little bit slower than he was, and kind of leaves a little to be wanted on that one.
60 even for Zhang, who started his career off collegiately at Ohio State, freshman and sophomore years.
Only 60 points on that dive, so that actually drops him now to 4th place without now Briadam Herrera even competing his second dive yet.
51-52B for the senior Herrera.
That was a good-looking dive. A little bit of a splash there on the end, and if I'm being a little nitpicky, I think I saw his legs come apart just a little bit or get a little sloppy in the twist right about there. And when he was coming for the water, however, 3.2, it's a high degree of difficulty, a tough dive. So if he's got 6.5s and a few 7.5s from the judges, he still managed to score 68.8. But that's actually not going to be enough.
Herrera has won this UT Diving Invitational in 2015, but right now trailing Juan Hernandez through 2 rounds. Come back for 3 and 4. Hall of Fame Diving Invitational. Those the coaches, judges, as well as we are through 2 rounds of 6, and we promised you a great field. It's delivered thus far. Hernandez, Herrera, Thornton, Wendell. Look at Zhang all the way down there in 5th. Shows you how good of an event this is.
It is, and we're only 2 rounds in. There's a lot of diving left. However, Juan Hernandez had the hardest dive so far in the 2nd round, and it actually paid off. Got a 9 even from a couple judges, and it was able to skyrocket him to the top of the leaderboard right now.
So 3rd time through, Cifelli with a reverse 1 1/2 somersault, 2 1/2 twist free. Honorable mention, All-American on the 1 meter board. 13th after the preliminary rounds at NCAA tournament last year. Finished 8th in the consolation round.
Oh, that was disappointing for him, I'm sure, because I saw him warm that up much better. At the end of the board, you can see his toes are actually a little bit over the tip of the board, which kind of leaves you unbalanced as you head into a dive like that. And that's already kind of a tricky dive considering you're jumping forward and rotating backwards while also twisting. So you're going to want to make sure you're balanced at the end of the diving board. Unfortunately, left it a little short because he wasn't.
Scores in for Cifelli. Now David Hoffer graduated spring of 2018. A bachelor's in economics, business as well, a focus on global politics. Pursuing his graduate degree. Won this event in a duel against UCLA, finished 5th against USC, coming off a redshirt season last year. He's in with his 3rd dive.
And it was a terrific dive. The scores are going to be phenomenal on this dive, but what I want you to look at is the fact that the degree of difficulty is only a 2.3. So by comparison, some other athletes in this event are doing that dive plus an additional rotation, a back 2.5 pike instead of a back 2.5 or a back 1.5. 7.5s. Again, it was a great dive, but he needs to really be competing some more difficult dives if he's going to keep up with some of these other athletes.
Well, Kat, to your point, just for frame of reference, when you look at the dive list for Zhang, Herrera, the top competitors, along with Hernandez, Zhang and Herrera don't have any dives in the 2s in terms of DD. Hernandez with just 1, so that really the separation here in the 1 meter. Yusuf Salem, 205C, DD of 3.0.
And just completely over-rotates it. He had a lot of power and a lot of strength coming off of the diving board. And this dive can be difficult for some athletes to make around all the way. He has no problem completing 2.5 rotations, but arches his back and comes out a little late, reaches for the water too aggressively, and lets it just fly past vertical.
See a 5.5 from judges 1 and 6, 7 as well, 52.50 for the member of the Egyptian national diving team, Sam Thornton. Same dive.
And that's also, You know what? It's a good dive. I don't mean to sound unenthusiastic about it, but unfortunately, he looks like he's struggling a little bit to make it around. Arches and reaches for the water there at the end. Doesn't quite grab his hand in time in order to get a clean entry.
61.50. So where does that dive go wrong? Where does he lose it?
You know what? I think right off the bat, coming off of the diving board, you need to get all the strength out of the diving board. You need to be at the right angle and really get into that tuck position in order to get the rotation completed to give yourself time to reach for the water and get a good entry.
Our leader after 2 rounds. This the hardest dive he has on his dive sheet.
Oh, and that was beautiful. Just a little bit too much of a splash. You can see here he actually tried to pike save as he's hitting the water, which is where he would try to do a pike in order to pull some of that water under with him. You can kind of see it there on that replay. Unfortunately, it's used to try and increase your rip and improve your entry, and he still had a little bit too much of a splash to get the big scores on that.
66.30. 6s, 6.5s, and 7s. So possibly, does that open the door for the competition?
It definitely could. We'll see. We'll see if anyone's able to step through, though.
Reverse 2.5 somersault tuck for Jordan Windle.
Not too bad. I've seen a much better entry, though, from him. He was vertical when he hit the water. Looks pretty good. Slightly forward on the end of the diving board, so maybe that's why it threw off his entry a little bit. Again, great in the air, vertical dive, but had he had a rip on that at the end, it would have been 8.5, 9s.
He won this event at the 2017 UT Diving Invitational, 64.50. He's yet to secure first place finish in the fall season. Second versus Tennessee in a duel. Colin Zhang was the winner between those two teams. 53.35 D for Zhang.
Oh, that was beautiful. See, that's the kind of entry that you want to see. Barely any splash when they hit the water. You want to make sure your body is perfectly vertical and perpendicular to the water when you're hitting it. You don't want to be over-rotated or under-rotated. 7s, a few 7.5s from the judges for a total of 64.5. Not enough to take the lead, but still a solid dive to keep him in the running.
Still trailing Hernandez, Thornton, and Windle as Briadam Herrera closes out round 3 with a forward 3.5 somersault pike. DD of 3.3.
Oh, that is so disappointing. That completely takes him out of the running, to be honest, for the lead. He's going to have to come back quite a bit in these last 3 dives because of that. Excellent hurdle you'll see here, perfectly balanced. Gets a good takeoff, good pike, but just holds on to that pike way too long and completely over-rotates that dive.
And reflected in the scores for Herrera. 4s, 4.5s, 5s of 46.20. Cumulative 185.50. So Hernandez will hold on to the lead, but now trailed by Thornton and Windle. What do they have to do to catch him?
And now, it's only a 22 point difference that we're looking at here, so it's not undoable, especially within 3 dives. However, Juan Hernandez has really stepped up. He's competing some of the most difficult dives so far with his front 3.5 and his inward 2.5 pike, and he's nailing them. So if he continues on that trend, he'll be hard to catch because of the level of difficulty he's excelling at.
Josefelli will kick round 4 off. Mass communications major at Purdue. Dad John played baseball at University of New Mexico. 4th place finisher at the Big Ten Championships last year.
It was a great dive. That's a really good front 3.5 tuck for him. Degree of difficulty is at 3.0. A little bit off to the corner on that hurdle, but it doesn't seem to impact him much. I would like to see him in a tighter tuck position. Just little details like that to make him more polished in the air, but a very well executed front 3.5.
4 7s, 1 7.5, 2 6.5s, even 63 puts him at 235.50. He's happy with the result. Fist pump from the senior. This inward 2.5 somersault tuck.
Now on an inward, you're going to be standing backwards but rotating forwards. So a lot of the tricky part of this dive is making sure you're the right distance from the diving board. And he had that. If anything, maybe a couple inches too far away from the board, but I did like his rotation. He really came off that diving board with a lot of power, very aggressive into that tuck. Twists a little bit when he hits the water. You see his legs sort of twist slightly, which is where you'll see a couple deductions.
6.5, 7s, 60.45, and we've done enough of these now. You guys are fickle. You want it close to the diving board, but not too far away.
That is the tricky part. You don't want to scare anyone. You don't want it too close that you could put yourself in danger or scare anyone, but at the same time, you can't really execute some of these dives very well if you're shooting them into the middle of the pool. You have to make sure you're in that sweet spot of the right amount of distance, which is one of the things and one of the criteria that these judges are looking for.
Salim, the Pac-12 champion on the 1 meter board last year.
Not too bad. Speaking of distance, he was a great distance from the diving board for a reverse 2.5. Definitely has enough power and enough strength to complete this dive well. Comes out and just arches his back, a little bit over rotated and just too splashy. Needs to clean things up a little bit, which is what this meet is for. We're in the middle of the season. It's kind of where you're fine-tuning some things still.
An even 57 for Salim. Third place after 3 rounds, Sam Thornton. Reverse 2.5 somersault tuck.
Again, the same dive we just saw, so it's a really excellent frame of reference to compare the two athletes.
Have seen all 3.0 DDs from Thornton thus far.
Oh, not too bad. You know what, he looked like he was pulling that tuck really hard. You see his feet flex. He's trying to make that around because it wasn't the best hurdle. He was a couple inches back from the end of the diving board. But he is able to keep his composure and make that dive around with straight 7s, 1 6.5. Not a bad way to kind of just squeak out of the 4th round with a solid dive.
Wink and a finger point to
Yeah,
the
he's
audience.
He's like, all right, we'll take it. Moving on.
Even 63 for Sam Thornton. See what that can do to try to catch up to the leader after 3 rounds, Juan Hernandez. DD of 3.2 on this 305B.
Oh, see, to give you guys an example, he just did the same dive, but in the pike position. So it's what we just saw from Sam Thornton, a reverse 2.5, but in the pike position, that dive is so much more difficult. I think he could have had it. I think he didn't see his spots properly or his visual cues, came out of that dive a hair too early, and unfortunately left it short, and probably left that window open for Wendell or for Colin Zhang or Herrera to see if they can kind of close that gap.
Well, you talk about closing that gap, as now Thornton will be ahead of Hernandez. Thornton was in 3rd coming into this 4th round. We'll see what Wendell has here. 107C.
Oh, that's excellent. He makes that look so simple and so easy. He rotates so quickly. It's a beautiful front 3.5 tuck. Gets a great hurdle, so he's confident coming off the diving board. Pikes out of that tuck, which is just beautiful. It just shows a lot of technique, a lot of grace through the air for such a difficult dive. 7.5s from every judge, and is able to actually move ahead of Sam Thornton by 3.5 points now.
So we have reversed things. Now Wendell up into 1st, and Kat, to the point that you had made earlier for Hernandez, finding those visual cues and spotting, that's the advantage that Wendell has here diving here at home, and these other competitors, they are trying to hone throughout, so come springtime, they're locked in.
Absolutely. And in most cases, if they're spotting the water or the board, it just takes a little while to kind of get used to your surroundings. Oh, Colin Zhang answers, though. That was a very clutch dive. Does a front 3.5 pike. Again, the same dive you saw from Jordan, but much more difficult because he executes it in the pike position. Maybe leaves it a little short, kind of rolls it in, doesn't quite come out all the way of that pike position, but barely a splash. Great entry, 7.5. Because of the degree of difficulty being a 3.3, he's awarded 74 points and is able to overcome Wendell by just a pinch.
And that's what you talked about, top of the show. The difference between the top competitors would be the DD. That's where Wendell had lacked, as Riyadam Herrera is up on his 4th dive. What'd you
Not
think?
too bad. Not too bad. I think he got a little sloppy there when he came out of that pike and headed for the water. So he just looks a little off right here. Knees bent getting into the pike position. His back is arched coming out of it. Again, just he makes it around pretty well. 6 is a pretty standard dive, but I know he can execute that much better and in a much more clean fashion.
60.80 for Briadam Herrera. So we are 3-4 rounds, 2 left to be completed to crown a 1 meter champion. A shakeup on the leaderboard. It was Hernandez in the lead through 3, but now atop is Colin Zhang from Tennessee, followed by the Texas Longhorn, Jordan Windle, Sam Thornton, the Texas A&M Aggies. So the competition's really heated up.
It has, and you know that gap that we saw between 1st and 5th place heading into these rounds was a much bigger. So it's a tight race still, and it could still be anyone's game with 2 rounds to go.
So 2 rounds to decide a champion. Come on back for the conclusion of the men's 1 meter final. Awaiting on the women's side of things. In just under an hour they will dive. The first time we get to see that field, the 3 meter springboard finals. But still some business to handle here on the men's side. The 1 meter final has been good thus far. The last 2 rounds we've seen a shakeup in the leaderboard. Juan Hernandez goes from 1st down into 4th place, and Colin Zhang jumps up into 1st.
You know, I don't think this is the last we've seen of these shakeups, too. You're only looking at a 14-point difference between 5th and 1st place, and there's a lot of tough dives coming from Briadam Herrera, from Juan Hernandez. We're going to be seeing some really difficult dives that if they can execute, they could pull back into the lead. If they cannot, then it's really anyone's game.
Felly will kick things off. Tyler Denning, Kat LaRocca, you may have known her as Kat Kelly, during her time diving here at the University of Texas, 4-time All-American. So well qualified to deliver the scores as you like to put on your judge's cap. What'd you see on that dive?
Appreciate that. That's his best dive so far of the competition, partly because of that entry. That's a great entry. Barely a splash when he hit the water. We've talked about distance from the diving board. Great distance, 72.85 points, and in my opinion, his best dive so far.
72.85, a very solid score for Cifelli. His penultimate dive. Bring up David Hoffer. Reverse 2.5, somersault tucked.
We've seen this competed by a lot of the men so far in the competition, so unfortunately he's going to be stacked up against some pretty well executed dives.
Finished 3rd here in 2016.
That was a good looking dive. Unfortunately leaves it a little short. Thought it looked good in the air. I think it looks like he has more than enough strength and power to complete that dive. Just comes out of that tuck position and reaches for the water. Close to vertical, but not quite there, so you're going to get 6.5s, a couple 7s from the judges.
1-8 thrown in there as well. Judge 7, seen it
Judge
a couple
7
times.
really liked it.
Yeah, usually.
Unfortunately, that is one of the scores that's going to get dropped. So you'll see one of the 7s and an 8 get dropped, 2 of the 6.5s.
We got our eye on you, Judge
Yeah.
7. Always about a half point higher. Yusuf Salim having a solid competition thus far for the Egyptian national. Won the NCAA Zone E championships on the 1 meter. Qualified for NCAAs on all 3 boards.
That was a good dive. You can see his coach there really excited. He really liked it. Difficult dive, a reverse 1.5 with 2.5 twists. There's a lot happening here, and you got to make sure you keep your body tight and square when you're hitting the water. I think he got a little loose there on his entry. Wasn't perfectly tight when he hit the water. Again, maybe a little bit of polish could be taken care of in the air, just making sure those knees are perfectly straight, toes pointed, but that's all little stuff that he can fix throughout the season.
Consensus from the judges seems to be a 7 and even 63, 289.95 the cumulative score for Salim. This a big dive for Thornton. He's been in 3rd place the last 2 rounds.
He's just been solid and steady the whole way. I think we've seen some ups and downs from other divers, whereas he really is just so consistent throughout.
Closes out with his 2 hardest dives. This a 3.1 DD.
And again, just very consistent. Now I'm going to get picky and tell him he needs to point his toes, which I'm sure he's going to hear already, so he doesn't need my opinion on that. But otherwise, excellent coming off the diving board. Great height off the board that you can see there in the replay. A little bit too much of a splash when he hits the water, but other than that, that's a really phenomenal inward 2.5.
When if you saw the exchange right as he was getting out of the pool looking over his coach, I think that may have been what he was signaling. 69.75 for Sam Thornton. That will momentarily put him atop the leaderboard. See what the bounce back dive is from Hernandez. Go out of first after his round 4 dive. This is 205C.
Man, this guy's so dynamic. He just rotates so quickly. I feel like he can complete these dives and give himself plenty of time to come out, maybe have a cup of coffee, reach for the water. Leaves that one a little bit over-rotated, which is where you see some of that splash. But he's making these dives look so simple.
7.5, 64.50 will put him at 318.45, so that still trails Sam Thornton. Jordan Windle was in second place after 4 dives, a forward, 2.5, somersault, 1 twist pike. This is the hardest dive that we've seen thus far, and this the hardest of his 6 dives.
Oh, and it's beautiful. Yeah, Coach Goggins should be excited about that dive. What sets Jordan apart a lot of times is his entry into the water. Now, he's an excellent tower diver, and a lot of tower divers typically have great rips. So you'll see here what's different is when he hits the water, all of that water is being pulled under with him. Barely any splash. If I'm critiquing it, maybe he's about a foot or so too far out into the pool, a little too far away from the diving board, but a really terrific dive.
68.80. That 328.80 will put him about 2.5 points ahead of Sam Thornton. But this, the competitor that he had trailed after 4 dives. DD of 3.2 on this forward, 2.5 somersault, 1 twist pike.
Same dive and actually executed a little bit better. He stepped it up. That was the best full out we've seen in the competition and probably will for a long time. Perfect distance, perfectly balanced at the end of the board, perfectly vertical when he hits the water. A little bit of a splash there. I think he lost his legs a little mid-air when he was twisting, but otherwise 8.5s from some of the judges, 8s, and well-deserved.
76.80, so enough to keep him in first and establish some distance behind Windle and Thornton trailing him. Adam Herrera will close out round 5 with an inward 2.5 somersault pike.
Now this is his most difficult dive, so if he's going to be able to close that, 14-point gap that we saw earlier, this is how he's going to do it.
DD of 3.4.
Oh, that's not going to do it. He really didn't make the rotation as well as he needed to in order to complete that dive to vertical. Leans back a little as he's taking off. He isn't over his toes and over the diving board and aggressive getting into that pike position, so unfortunately he's unable to complete it all the way to vertical, leaving it short. 5.5s.
Jordan Windle awaits. He's trailing in second place behind Zhang, who after a stellar 4th and 5th rounds sits nearly 10 points clear of the competition. Sam Thornton in 3rd, Hernandez 4th.
Colin Zhang really stepped up that round and put a little bit more separation, not only between him and Jordan Windle, but especially between Sam Thornton and Juan Hernandez, making it more difficult for them to catch him in this final round.
And Kat, the reason, we've talked about this in years past, just the margin for error in this event so thin when you compare it to the platform or 3 meter that we'll see later on this week.
There really isn't. There's just, with 1 meter, you have a lot less time to really screw these things up. And a lot of these athletes, too, are doing the same dives, which means it's going to come down to really who can execute 6 solid dives. You can't miss one. If you miss one, you're out. Whereas in some other events, perhaps there's a chance for other athletes to do the same and give yourself an opportunity.
Diver from Purdue.
It has been 6s, a couple 6.5s from the judges for a total of 57. Not his best dive so far, but his most difficult, so he's probably happy with that.
And really the depth of the field, years past when we would go through and watch the preliminaries over into the finals, haven't seen like we would this year with NCAA qualifiers and finalists and people that finished in the top 8. Those are the ones that are chasing the lead dogs in the competition thus far. David Hoffer will close out his day. The reverse 1 1/2 somersault, 2.5 twist free. My hurdle wasn't so good there.
No, there you a little stumble on that one. You're good. David Hoffer, on the other hand, not so much on the stumble. That was a terrific final dive for him. Again, a lot going on when you're twisting and flipping like this, so to keep your legs straight and tight together and make sure that you stay clean in the air can be difficult for some of these divers, and he looks beautiful in the air. Very graceful, but also very strong off the diving board, so a good balance of that.
Closes out with a 57, 329.20 total for the grad student from Arizona State. His teammate will round out his competition, a 51.52B.
That was a great dive for him. Lost it a little bit there on the entry. He looked a little unsquare when he hit the water. Also a bit of a splash. However, it was we call this dive a full out, a front 2.5 with a full twist. Again, you see there when he hits the water, his legs are not quite square. The judges can see both legs as he's entering the water, and that's where his biggest deduction is going to come from.
1.6, 1.7.5, some 6.5s and 7s in there as well for Salim. Same dive coming up for Sam Thornton.
A lot of these divers save their most difficult dive from a DD standpoint until the end. Maybe they're very confident in them. It's not the most difficult dive to them, but at least they're ending on some really solid degree of difficulty to help boost their scores.
That is the case for Thornton in.
And again, the man is consistent. What can I say? You really don't see him miss too drastically one way or the other. He has his feet flexed there when he's coming off the diving board and getting into that pike position. But he's always vertical, usually a very from the judges, as usual.
That's my boy.
Had a good day, been energetic as well throughout. 67.20 with 393.45. Currently puts him atop the leaderboard. And you had just mentioned it. That's the 4th time we have seen that dive, and why it's so important here. The judges get to see it almost repeatedly. That was 3 in a row for that one dive, and ending strong. Thornton, this will now be the same from Hernandez to make it now 3 in a row.
And that might be the best one we've seen. Again, I think the difference with Hernandez is he is so powerful and dynamic. So while other divers may look like they're straining to complete these dives, it's a walk in the park for him. He makes it look easy, reaches for the water. A little bit of a splash there on the entry, but I think the best full out we've seen in this round.
Even 72, 390.45 for Hernandez. Started out strong, but closes with a strong dive. Can Jordan Windle do the same? Inward 2.5 somersault tuck.
Wow. Again, it's his entry that sets him apart. He's also very dynamic. He's similar to Hernandez in just how quickly he's able to rotate and how aggressive he is off the diving board. Plenty of time to pike out of that dive, add a little bit of flair, a little bit of polish to it, and then hit the water with such a beautiful entry.
Really enjoyed seeing him last year, and now what does he do in his sophomore season? 72.85, a 401.65 puts him in first place. But it is Zhang's competition to close out his hardest dive, the inward 2.5 somersault pike, DD of 3.4. As hard as any dive we have seen. Can he close out and take home the title?
Yes, he can. Simply put, that will do it. He also has a beautiful entry again. He excels in the platform events, and usually those athletes have some really solid entries into the water. But he also steps it up and does a more difficult dive because he does it in the pike position. So that degree of difficulty, along with these excellent scores, is going to keep him ahead of Wendell. Now we'll have to see what Herrera does, but he's not going to be able to catch up. I think Zhang just closed it out.
And he even added some distance, 76.50 for what will be your champion. Brianna Herrera will close out the competition, the senior, 53.35D.
That's a heck of a way to close out this competition. Look how high he gets off of the diving board. This is by far the most amount of height we've seen any of these divers able to get. He's up there past the 3-meter boards next to him. A little bit of a splash, kind of goes over to the right, you can see, so I don't think he was perfectly square when he hit the water, but honestly, I'm too amazed by how much height he got that I think I'll forgive some of that.
And even 69, 374.80 is there, is your champion. Colin Zhang from the University of Tennessee on the men's 1 meter. We'll speak with him when we come back.